Welcome back to AGX Media. There's been a lot of action in the markets recently, especially with gold and silver amid the coronavirus crisis, and as the central bankers scramble to keep the economy afloat. Here to make sense of it all is the founder of Arcadia Economics, author of The Big Short, and avid precious metals investor, Chris Marcus. You can find him on arcadiaeconomics.com or by searching Arcadia Economics on YouTube. But first, if this is your first time joining us, please go ahead and subscribe to our channels, as well as check out agxpay.com to learn how the power of modern silver money can help you claim financial freedom. Chris, thank you for being with us.
Nick, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks so much for having me on.
Let's jump right into it. I really enjoyed one of your most recent videos where you basically analyzed Fed Chair Powell's comments on 60 Minutes. Let me ask you, do you think the Fed knows what they're doing, or could they be setting up the markets for failure?
Well, first, I'll say that's one of the best questions I've had in a long time. I'll bet it's a mix where, it's like any of these pyramid schemes. It depends on conning a lot of people into thinking they're doing something legitimate. You hear in the military the compartmentalization, I think I pronounced it right there, where it's like, they're all building the different parts of the killing machine, but they don't know, hey, they're going to combine with what Joe's doing over there and go blow stuff up.
Yeah.
So, in fact, I have a friend I used to work with my first job at Moody's who worked at the San Francisco Fed, and I was talking to her the other day, I think from some of the stuff that, she hears on shows like yours and mine, where now she gets it and is like, yeah, this doesn't make sense. But a lot of the people, when they're in there, at least on the lower levels, believe it. I'll say I'm not trying to go out and criticize anyone, but it sure seemed to me like Jerome Powell flat out lied on 60 Minutes when he said everything was fine until Corona came along. Excuse me, Jerome, what about those repo lines you were doing for about 6 months before that, which they've never even explained why they were doing? So on some, whether the individual names, I can't speak to that, but you can read G. Edward Griffin's Creature from Jekyll Island, find out about Rothschilds funding both sides of the war. I think it was the War of 1812 where they knew there were surrender terms, but these guys slaughter a bunch more people anyway. So there are people who know, and I do believe there are people that are. I think we're seeing one of the biggest broad day bank robberies in history, which is obviously appalling given that, there's people really struggling out there. You're shutting businesses down, and these guys, are looting the system. So somebody at some level knows, if you want to call that Rockefellers or Soroses or Rothschilds.
Well, there's a sort of natural tendency with North Americans and most of the developed world, frankly, to be complacent. I think we've had it so good for so long that we kind of just expect it, but really there's nothing stopping a hyperinflationary situation in the future. So let me ask you this then. I know that you follow gold and silver avidly, and they've done pretty well. Silver, of course, initially dropped, but came back fairly quickly, and gold's actually performed well and done its job as a safe haven asset. But what are you seeing as we sort of head towards the end of the first wave of this crisis? Are we headed towards all-time highs?
Well, it's an interesting question because we have one variable that not everybody mentions. I don't know how it can be left out. Stuff is traded in paper. So you have silver, for example, came down from $49 in 2011. And people thought, well, Janet Yellen and all these guys were tightening all along the way. They talked about it a lot, but you can go look at the Fed balance sheet. They didn't tighten a darn thing, and that's blowing out. So you have a lot of stuff. I mean, JP Morgan's being charged with the RICO statute. HSBC just lost $200 million. There's a lot of banks that are selling paper gold and silver that I don't believe they will ever be able to deliver. And so that's distorting a lot of things in the pricing, but, at the same time, it's not an accident. Gold, I mean, we're not far away from that $1,900 all-time high. And it's not an accident because the Fed's printing unlimited. And in case anyone's like, what did he just say? Yeah, the Fed, they can't even put a number on how much they want to print. And it's like, we don't even know what they're really printing, but it's like the stories, if you get these Wall Street Journal headlines, well, here's 500 billion for small business loans. They're buying ETFs. They're printing money to buy It's insane. And then Powell says that he's concerned about the outlook and he's going to have to take aggressive action. Aggressive to that. So, and then when you have a situation where you have leverage, everyone I talk to seems to come back with 500 to 1 or more. And to be clear on that, for every ounce of physical silver through COMEX contracts or derivatives and a whole bunch of stuff we probably don't even know exists, you have 500 plus people think they own that.
Right.
So,
That's
you already have a delicate situation. Maybe this is what it was like for Bernie Madoff those last couple months. Once the market started melting down, it's coming to an end. Or maybe you've deluded yourself into just thinking you're God. And I think there's a lot of that type of thinking in the banker mentality where, hey, I want to get my bonus, blows up on the next guy's watch. Same with politics. But, then when it's one thing when you're saying, well, we're going to tighten, we're going to undo the balance sheet, we're going to raise rates, but now they're not even pretending.
Yeah.
I mean, what are people supposed to do? What are they supposed to think?
Yeah, and I think a big reason people are starting to look for alternatives and for what works in today's economy. So I have to ask, do you think the USD will maintain its grip on the world for much longer? Or are we seeing a transition to a more digital economy with Bitcoin and blockchain assets, or into something that is back towards precious metals like we were talking about earlier? What are your thoughts on this?
Well, I guess the best thought I could offer there is that try not to have your strategy dependent on getting the timing right. If you buy physical silver, physical gold, it's still going to be a piece of metal. It's just, when does the rest of the world realize or stop getting conned by, some of these banks and central banks that have been ripping people off, so when does it happen? There's sure a lot of smoke out there now. They're playing musical chairs between the LBMA and the COMEX. They just fired off 3 trillion. Apparently, I hear they're talking about a second stimulus package. You have petro yuans, which are the kind of thing countries didn't openly get to talk about years ago. There's an analyst, London Paul from the Sirius Report, who talks about how if you go through the Saudi Aramco prospectus, you can track that they're sending oil directly to China. If you listen to Putin talk, he doesn't hide it. Russia sold all their treasuries, I think it was 2 years ago. And it was interesting because there's a little bit of a delay when you find that out. But I remember I went back and Putin was giving a speech when he'd been reelected. The guy tells you what he's going to do. He doesn't lie. He doesn't hide it. And I think that, it's sad to me as an American seeing, this government that I've lived under and the way that treat people without respect. I hear things about the Chinese government. I'm sure they're not choir boys either, but it's a little bizarre to me that your largest creditor, you find ways to antagonize and publicly humiliate them at any opportunity possible. Seems bizarre.
Yeah.
And, so that can go on. I think the suppression of the metals, has gone on far longer than I ever dreamed it would be possible. But if you structure things so that you can use that to your advantage, people who can have a long-term perspective now, it's like a fantasy land if you can have that mindset.
Well, I think there's a lot of skeptics out there for the suppression of metals, but we've seen this decoupling of spot price from physical assets, which the premiums can run as high as 40%. So it really just goes to show how disconnected from reality the spot price actually is. So I'd love to get your thoughts on blockchain assets. There's often this comparison for people claiming that Bitcoin is the new gold. Any comments?
Well, I'll preface that with saying I've spent far more time thinking about silver than the Bitcoin and the blockchain, although I am familiar with it. And part of what stood out to me, I remember when I first heard about it was, I think, 2011. was talking to a friend of mine who actually used to work for Peter Schiff's, when they started selling metal. Smart guy. We would talk about silver manipulation, Austrian economics. So it's someone I'm like thinking, all right, we're on the same page here. And he was telling me about Bitcoin. So it always seemed, I'm like, well, this at least makes more sense than the dollar. And even I know a lot of gold and silver guys don't like hearing about it, but I mean, gee, just measure to the dollar versus Bitcoin. You'd still have to choose rather than this dollar racket. Um, I'd also say it's worth noting when I've also noticed anyone who can actually explain the concept of Bitcoin or any sophistication, the coding element, they're usually they're like gushing about how great it is and the potential it has.
Yeah.
So my guess is that perhaps if you think of it similar to the way the internet started, where there were periods where, if you had .com in the name, but there was like nothing but a pizza box behind the documents,
Yeah.
it went up. So if you told me that 95 to 98% of the cryptos are junk and are obsolete, but that the ones that meet a legitimate business case survive and do incredibly well, I would agree with that. I admire what you guys are doing where, I think there will be a lot of combination of metals and cryptos where, stuff that's backed or any sort of asset that can be backed. I mean, this is essentially, and my first job at Moody's was asset-backed commercial paper, where they were securitizing all sorts of different assets, except there they pretend there's 100 instead of one and sell it to multiple people. And what the blockchain represents to me, it's like, here's an accounting system, everyone can see it. So, if you try and steal this, people can look and see that's where it went. So I get it, and there's certainly in metals there are going to be scams, in Bitcoin there's going to be scams, for anything throughout history that will be the case. But I think things that meet a legitimate business case, and if you have the cryptography element, as much as I love silver, let's say I hire a graphic designer to do something in China and I want to pay him now. Do I, shave, way out and like shave off a little sliver and mail it? So to me, I see the legitimate projects almost like a visa. It's just providing the cryptology so it gets there safely. And I think systems that really have the right audit procedures in place, because people know there's GLD and SLV and the concerns, but where it's like, all right, here's the audit, here's the things that guarantee that when I spend $1, that ounce of silver is or part of silver is gone to the other person and not made up. I think we'll need that.
Yeah, I think we do, and that you're right. And a big piece of marrying blockchain assets with assets like precious metals is that blockchains are designed to be distributed so that there are limitations on how much people can mint and how people can behave, and it's more of a public consensus experience than just a small group of people with way too much power. So I'm glad that you see the value in it, but I totally understand your perspective in just buying into those traditional assets as well.
Plus another, if I could just add one more thing there, I may be into running for world's biggest silver bull. So I love silver, but let's say you want to leave the US if you're concerned about some of the things that are happening. I'm not telling anybody where to go, but you can't get on the plane with $1 million of silver. Whereas, you could, something, if there's a crypto back, or even just transferring the money so that you purchase silver. I just look at them as tools. And what Austrian economics and the scholars have pointed out that always made sense to me is that you let them compete in the free market. There are some people I know that they love their metal, and no matter what you tell them about cryptos or what it can do, they're not going to want it. And I've met people that, they love their cryptos, they don't want it. So whatever the market needs are, when you don't have someone controlling it in this system, I mean, they're using force. So, I mean, because it's a fraudulent system and you're making off well with it. But I think there's a lot of good that will come out of that, something that corrupted maybe there'll be an adjustment, but geez, it's like if the dollar crashes, I mean, it's be like losing the mafia shaking you down for 90% of your income. I mean, I think we might actually figure it out a lot better than we've been led to believe. Because, gee, does that seem like a fear tactic the government would use? Oh, without our dollar, you'll all be.
A lot of great content. One last question for you before letting you go. Tell our audience who may not be familiar with your work about what it is that Arcadia Economics does and what you're all about.
Sure. Arcadia Economics is basically to help people who are seeing things that make no sense. They seem like they make no sense because they don't, and helping people be prepared and at least understand what's coming and give them insight and at least the true version of some of these things. I was on Wall Street for 11 years, stunned by what I saw, stunned by what I see now. But after walking through Occupy Wall Street every day to get to the New York Stock Exchange and seeing there were people angry and confused, yet it's kind of complex. So you don't even know where to direct that. Yeah. I felt it was important to take what I learned and shared that, which we do at Arcadia Economics. I have a YouTube channel. Just released a book called The Big Silver Short, which dives exactly into the manipulation. Why is the price so bizarre? Is the thing being manipulated? And help people with different, whether it's trading, consulting, or finding metals, different stuff like that. Anything, or just helping people get in touch with whatever they're looking for. Fortunate to meet a lot of great folks like yourself and make myself accessible for any questions, and particular in silver. Hopefully we'll get you on the show soon too. It'd be nice to have you there and talk some more about silver. And I think, again, we don't know the timing, but even if you have to wait a little bit longer, I mean, I've never expected to see anything like this in my entire career. I've never seen or read about anything historically. I don't know, maybe this is similar to the end of the Roman Empire. We'll see how long it takes to unfold, but it's happening now. And again, I appreciate you having me on and what you're doing to let people know about these things.
And where can people go to buy your book?
At arcadiaeconomics.com. You can find a tab for The Big Silver Short because it's like The Big Short. It just always seemed like part two to me. And if you love that movie and that book and always wondered, gee, that'd be great if I could find something like that, it's out there now.
Thank you so much for joining us, Chris.
Thanks again for having me on here. It's great catching up with you.
That's all we have for today's interview with the host of Arcadia Economics, Chris Marcus. So glad that you guys could join us. And as always, if this is your first time, please go ahead and subscribe to our channels, as well as check out agxpay.com to learn how the power of modern silver money can help you claim financial freedom. Take care.